I'm Brandon Cow, and this is my performance-based project for EDU 513, Models of Teaching, with Dr. McVeigh at Franciscan University of Steubenville. For my project, I have chosen Madeline Hunter's instructional theory into practice model. The steps involved in this model begin with learning objectives, moving on to the anticipatory set, then stating the lesson objectives, input, check for understanding, guided practice, and finally independent practice. The learning strategies that I've used for this particular lesson begin with identifying similarities and differences, reinforcing effort and providing recognition, note-taking, homework and practice, cooperative learning, and cues and questions. There are two learning objectives for this lesson. The first is to analyze the differences between open-ended questions and multiple-choice questions. The second objective is to examine and analyze the process of answering open-ended questions. So we begin with the anticipatory set. And in this particular part of the lesson, I'll be utilizing the strategies of identifying similarities and differences, reinforcing effort, cues and questions, and it'll take about 5 minutes. So the anticipatory set begins with a question. What are the differences between answering multiple choice questions and open-ended questions? Students will answer this question through the use of the quiz manager within Illuminate. The quiz manager makes it easy for me to ensure that every student answers the question and I can quickly gauge their current understanding of the differences. Once all answers have been submitted, we will discuss the differences. So a basic explanation of the difference between the two different types of questions is that an open-ended question doesn't have choices that you can just pick. You can't just say A, B, C, or D. You actually have to write your own answer in sentences. That's why most people think open-ended questions are harder, but I'm going to tell my student that's why we're going to try to make them easier. The input portion of the lesson includes the strategies of identifying similarities and differences and note-taking. The first thing that I will introduce to students will be the open-ended question rubric. The rubric is on a 3-point scale, as you can see here. While looking at the rubric, we will discuss what is specifically required to score a 1, a 2, or a 3. And students will be encouraged to always aim for a score of 3 for every open-ended question they answer. And in order to score 3, students must do 3 things. Number 1, provide a response that completely answers the question. Number 2, provide text-based support for their answer. And 3, clearly explain how their text-based support or their evidence proves that their answer is correct. The next thing that I will do is introduce a clearly structured format for answering open-ended questions, which is the ACE strategy. And there are 3 basic steps involved in the ACE strategy. Answer the question, cite evidence from the text that supports your answer, and explain the evidence that you chose. Then we'll take a little bit of a closer look at these 3 steps. Step 1, answering the question. That's the A of ACE. When you answer the question, students need to make sure that they restate the question in their answer. And this shows that they understand exactly what the question is asking. The second step, or the C in the ACE strategy, is to cite evidence from the text to support their answer. They'll need to provide at least 2 pieces of evidence from the text, and at least one of them should be a direct quote from the text. And the third and final step of ACE is E, and that's to explain the evidence that they've chosen. They have to explain how their evidence proves that their answer is correct. Now, after explaining the ACE strategy and the steps involved, I'll be using an analogy to help students understand the process. And the analogy goes basically like this. Imagine yourself as a lawyer that is trying to win a criminal case. Your answer is like trying to prove that someone is guilty of a crime. When you cite evidence from the text, it's like you're showing the jury the evidence from the crime. For example, fingerprints or DNA or eyewitnesses. And the more evidence that you provide, the better. Now, you can't just show the jury the evidence. You have to explain how your evidence proves that the person is guilty or that your answer is right. For the modeling step in this lesson, I'll be utilizing the strategies of cues and questions, reinforcing effort, and providing recognition. We're looking at about 10 to 12 minutes for this portion of the lesson. So I'll be using the poem Mother to Son by Langston Hughes to model the process of answering open-ended questions. And this is a poem that we've previously read when students were learning the concept of author's message. And the open-ended question that we'll examine is, of course, what is the author's message of the poem? Now, after briefly discussing the poem again and the concept of author's message, I'll present students with a sample student response to the question and ask them, what do you think? So we'll take a look at this example, and as I said, I'll ask them, what is the author's message in the poem? Then I'll ask them, does this answer follow the A strategy? And I want you to use the rubric to score the response. Is this a 1, a 2, or a 3? And here is the student response. Now, this is actually a student-created response from one of my previous students. Now, using a poll, I will ask students to score this response using the rubric provided at the beginning of class. And after all students have responded, we will view the poll results. Now, based on previous experience, I can assume that the majority of students will actually give this response a 2. However, this response should only receive a score of 1. And I would then model how I would approach this answer and why I would only give it a 1. First of all, I would ask myself, does this answer the question? Does this response answer the question clearly? And has the question been restated in the response? And when I look at this response, the answer is no to both of those points. This response does not really answer the question, and it fails to make any mention of the author's purpose. They didn't give any textual evidence to support their answer. And the response is essentially a basic summary of the poem. And while it does demonstrate a basic understanding of the poem, it does not address the question, what is the author's message? We'll then move on to the guided practice and check for understanding portion of the lesson. And this portion of the lesson will utilize cooperative learning, reinforcing effort, and providing recognition, and it will take about 10 minutes. Now, students will be given another sample answer for the same question. I'll ask them, what about this answer? Same poem, same question. Is this one any better, and why? And here is the other response. Now, this time, when students are scoring this, they will be grouped in breakout rooms and asked to work cooperatively to score this new response and provide a clear explanation for the score they've given. And they'll be using this basic graphic organizer to help them do that. This response does provide a much better answer to the question, and it meets the requirements of a 3 on the rubric. Now, while students are working, I'll move from room to monitor their progress, answer any questions they might have, and provide guidance as they work. And students should recognize the ways that this response specifically meets the requirements of the rubric, and it follows the A strategy very carefully and closely. So how does it do that? Well, number one, it answers and restates the question. Starts out, I think Langston Hughes' message in the poem Mother to Son is that life may be hard, but you have to keep on going. So it clearly states what the message is in the poem, and it clearly answers the question. Two, it provides three well-chosen pieces of evidence from the text. And in fact, all three of them are direct quotes from the poem. And for the third step of the ACE strategy, it also it clearly explains how the evidence supports the answer. I also want students to realize that although there are a few minor grammatical errors, that they do not affect the score. An open-ended question is assessing their ability to read, not their writing ability. Now, once all groups have finished, students will come back into the main room. Students will then share their scores and give their explanations for the scores to the entire class. The next step in the lesson would be closure. And in this portion of the lesson, the strategies that I'll utilize will be cues and questions, providing feedback and recognition, and this will take about 5 minutes. So first, students will have the chance to ask questions about the lesson, of course. And then I will ask students to answer the following questions. What do the letters in ACE stand for? And what are the steps in the ACE strategy? And what kinds of questions do we answer using this strategy? So there are 3 questions here that students will be answering. And all 3 questions will help to demonstrate their understanding of the lesson and of the lesson objectives for this particular lesson. And finally, independent practice. And students will have the following homework to complete. They'll be given a short story to read, and then they will answer the open-ended question that they'll find in Schoology. I'll remind them to make sure that they use the ACE strategy and that open-ended question rubric that they got at the beginning of class. And this homework assessment will give students the opportunity to practice and demonstrate their understanding of the ACE strategy as it is used to answer open-ended questions. And that concludes my performance-based project. Thank you for watching.